Question for you is what are the basic guidelines of a whole food plant-based diet, and what are some key things to do to make it successful?
Okay, so we talked about for most people having a transition week. I think that is a real key because not only are you undoing a lifetime necessarily of health problems, but also of eating in a certain way. And that takes some time. You're going to experiment with the things that work for you. Maybe you start with taking recipes that you love and use now and shifting them to plant-based and taking out the oil. So those kinds of things. But the sort of general guidelines that we give people first is to focus on whole plant foods. Mm-hmm. So again, at Physicians Committee, we have a power plate. It's pretty simple, it's straightforward. It looks a lot like Canada's new plate, only it's plant-based. But it's divided into fruits, vegetables, grains, whole grains, and legumes, which are, again, fancy speak for beans, peas, and lentils. So the closer people can get to eating off that plate, the better. And again, for people who are actually actively trying to lose weight or reverse or at least improve type 2 diabetes, we recommend actually just put nuts and seeds aside until they get where they want to go. Or for people who are, okay in that regard, to keep that to about a small handful or 1 ounce a day of nuts and seeds. So that's what we're going for, because when you focus on those whole plant foods, you get lots of fiber, you get all that plant-based protein, you're getting calcium from beans and greens. Iron's another thing people worry about. You're going to get iron also in beans and greens. So I'm a huge fan of people eating beans and greens. And just a side note on that iron, the iron that comes from plant foods is actually a safer form. So your body has a much easier time of absorbing it when it's needed or letting it go on through if it's not. Whereas for animal-based iron, it's absorbed. It's much harder for your body to regulate it. So it's much easier to just be absorbed, even if you already have too much. So plant-based sources of iron are great. So that's step one, focusing on whole plant foods. So, I mean, again, Twizzlers, vegan, Oreos, vegan, but they're not necessarily ideal for promoting health. So whole plant foods. Second, avoiding animal products. Again, for all the reasons we talked about, they're high in saturated fat. They tend to have higher levels of those organic pollutants in them. They're high in cholesterol, things like heme iron. They're carcinogenic or cancer-causing compounds that form when they're cooked at high temperatures. There's so many reasons to just move those off the plate. So avoiding animal products, that's step 2. So step 3 is minimizing added oils, and that's what you talked about. That, again, those in particular, well, for the most part, vegetable oils tend to be very high in omega-6 fatty acids and very low in omega-3s on the whole. That's pro-inflammatory. It's really easy to gain weight when you're using a lot of oil because they're so concentrated in calories and so stripped of their nutrients. So we ask people to minimize those, to saute using broth, or even, a little cooking spray that gives you the tiniest layer of oil, but it's very little. But, broth or something, even a little bit of wine, the alcohol tends to cook off and you get some good flavor. For sauteing or for roasting, you can just dry roast. So minimizing added oils. And then, of course, the last piece is to take vitamin B12. It is not optional. And at least here in the States, it's recommended that everyone over the age of 50 be supplementing with vitamin B12 because as we age, we don't absorb it as well. Everyone who's it's recommended for folks who are on a lot of medication. So metformin is one that a lot of people are on that can interfere with B12 absorption. And then, of course, on a plant-based diet, you need to add it. So to take vitamin B12. So really, it's 4 steps. Whole plant foods, avoid animal products, minimize added oils, and take B12.
Great.
Thankfully, it's not complicated. I also want to say one thing about soy.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of people have concerns about it. They've heard things like, oh, well, soy has, phytoestrogens, or, I had a friend who had breast cancer and now she won't eat soy, so I don't think I will either. There are a lot of myths around it. My advice on soy is to include it, to include soy food. So that's like edamame, which is just young soybeans. The closer again to whole, so things like tofu and soy milk are also great options. Those phytoestrogens in soy are actually protective.
Yeah.
So they are associated with a lower risk of getting breast cancer, also prostate cancer, fun fact, and a lower risk if you are a survivor of breast cancer of getting a recurrence, also associated with lower cholesterol, less inflammation. So include soy in there. And then a last tip, again, is to actually eat enough.
Mhm.
Make sure you're eating until you're full. This is the beauty of this way of eating. You never have to be cranky or hungry. Even if you're trying to lose weight, just eat till you're full.
Yeah. And so one of the concerns people have here, and like with the new Canada Food Guide, there's this emphasis on fruits and vegetables. And I think people automatically associate that with lettuce and grapes and things that are imported from south of the border and that are much more expensive in the supermarket. So could you talk to us about like how expensive is it to be whole food plant-based, and is it really going to break our budget, and is it not affordable for people on a low income?
No, it's actually, I think this is probably the most affordable way to eat, because animal products tend to be really expensive. So, you know, if with a few sort of basic steps, it can be really cheap to eat plant-based. I mentioned this because as part of so I'm a registered dietitian. As part of my training, we were asked to eat on, let me see, the budget was $4 a day. I ended up doing it for $3.80 a day, eating 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables, meaning exceeding all my protein needs, meeting my calorie needs, all these things. And what I was focusing on were these whole plant foods that are incredibly nutritious, but also really inexpensive. So things like beans and whole grains, and it's canned or dry beans. Both of those are really inexpensive. And whole grains, oatmeal with, you know, again, we're trying to keep nuts to a small amount, but a little bit of peanut butter goes a long way. You know, canned tomatoes, things that you can make really great stews and chilies with. In terms of actual produce itself, to sticking to some of the less expensive produce items. So things like bananas, apples can be relatively inexpensive depending on the season. Frozen fruit, you can buy it in bulk. If you have freezer capability, again, it actually retains more nutrients oftentimes than the fresh fruit that is shipped in. I'm trying to think of what else. Cabbage, a lot of the cabbage family vegetables are very cheap, but cabbage itself is unbelievably cheap when you look at how much you get out of a single head of cabbage, so lots of that. Romaine lettuce, we had a little recall on that here recently, but it's all good now, so that's another one that's pretty inexpensive. And people poo-poo iceberg lettuce, but honestly, it's actually as things go, it's not the most nutritious lettuce, but it's way more nutritious than so many other foods, and it's pretty cheap. So that's another one that is nice to add in for texture and crunch and variety. So really, you can eat, honestly, I've never eaten for cheaper than when I was eating a healthy plant-based diet. It was, and again, with a supplement of B12, also very cheap. It was in a very pleasant way to eat. I had classmates who were hungry and cranky and not feeling great, and I was doing fine.
Right. Yeah, and I think one of the things here, like, so in Newfoundland, we get more than 80% of our food is imported. Newfoundland's an island, so there's always this concern when there's poor weather, like there's ice, if the ships aren't going to come in and deliveries and that sort of thing. But we do have a lot of potatoes, and we've got cabbage and kales and all the cruciferous vegetables and carrots and beets, and so all of those things, and plus the dried foods, they store so well. And so
phenomenally healthy. Yeah. Oh, I forgot carrots. Those are another, and sweet potatoes. Potatoes, yes, we did a lot of sweet potatoes and carrots. They're so good for you. Also, the sweet potatoes and carrots associated with lower breast cancer risk. I mean, and again, that's why I could go on, but it's not just about weight loss or eating for cheap or, you know, reducing risk of certain diseases. Like it works. And again, this is one of the reasons that I really, once I read all the science on this, it's good for pretty much all the things. And that was what really just sort of solidified it for me, that this was the way, as a person with a very skeptical mind and a science background, that this was the way I was going to eat, because it really, all the science pointed in the same direction.
And how long have you been plant-based for now?
Oh gosh. I started this journey back in 2010. There were some blips and backtracking along the way. But in terms of full-on plant-based, I would say 2.5, 3 years, and like 98% for another, gosh, it's 2019, 5 years beyond that. Yeah. So it's just been, and again, it's a journey. So people shouldn't, you know, if you're not 100% on day one, like, that's okay. The more of these foods, the closer you get in that direction, the better off you're going to be. So yeah, vegan's great, optimal, love it, especially whole food, plant-based. But moving in that direction, every step you take is very likely to give you health benefits.
Cool. And you've got a blog, I believe. Do you still have it?
I do. Yes.
Yeah.
It's called Veggie Quest. It's veggie-quest.com. I don't update it as much as I'd like, but lots of great recipes and fun tips and just some inspiration for again, this is, I should also say, I've never eaten more delicious food in my entire life. Yeah. Have you had this experience?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, you're trying all these new things and it's so colorful and delightful. It really is. It's a fun way to eat too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually saw somebody posted today on social media. There's this great picture of a bunch of lettuce, and this was like what I thought it was to go vegan before I went vegan. Right. And then there's this picture of like a veggie burger and a whole grain bun and some other side vegetables, and that's what it's like to eat vegan. Like I've never had so much variety.
So true.
Yeah, it is incredible. And I think one of the things too that's amazing is that our taste buds adjust to what we're eating. So when people initially think, oh, this doesn't taste very good, it's actually because your taste buds have adapted to high salt, high fat, high sugar.
Yep.
And when you get rid of those and you try it, like do it for 2 weeks and then try to eat those foods again, you'll realize how much you can taste the salt and the fat and the sugar.
Oh yeah.
How good the whole foods taste.
Yeah. So, and how those processed foods just don't taste good anymore. They're overpowering and just, it's not right. It just doesn't taste right after you've gotten away from them for a little while. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for coming on for the interview. And I want to tell people as well, for PCRM, I got this little card here, but they can do this 21-day vegan kickstart, and that's all for free. And there's a free app as well. Mm-hmm. So anybody who is wants to get on board with the Canada Food Guide and wants to start eating for better health, PCRM has great free resources. So.
And yeah, we have lots of stuff. So that app is a bunch of fun, great recipes and inspirational videos and how to do this stuff. Well, how do I cook without oil? We've got you covered. And then if you go on the PCRM.org website, all kinds of information by different health conditions. So whatever someone is struggling with, there's likely to be some information there for them.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, because it's wonderful to be able to speak to a registered dietitian and to get the facts on a whole food plant-based diet and talk about how nutritionally complete that is.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me on. This has been a pleasure. And yeah, I really encourage people to check out PCRM.org and the Kickstart and all the great information that you're posting.
Well, thank you. And hopefully we'll see you again sometime.
Sounds good.